Okay, we will start. Are you ready?
Okay, it's live.
Super. So, welcome everyone. I am Jaime, Head of Education of Museo Tamayo. We are excited to share the conference Crítica and Machine Philosophy by Luciana Parisi in the context of Materia Abierta, summer school in theory, art, and technology in Mexico City, founded and directed by Federico Pérez Villoro. This is our second collaboration with Materia Abierta through the Futuros Posibles program of Museo Tamayo that began in 2019 with a seminar by Armena Vanessian, followed by interactions with Imgar Emmelheims, Patricia Reed, Christopher Roth, and Mauro Reis. Futuros Posibles is a series of events with leading thinkers on topics such as object-oriented ontology, immaterialism, speculative realism, posthumanism, among other investigations that influence contemporary art and vice versa. Futuros Posibles is co-created by Humberto Moro, Artistic Deputy Director of Tamayo Museo, and I. We have the chat open for questions and comments. We will share with Luciana after the conference. Welcome, Luciana and Federico.
Gracias, Jaime, por la introducción y muchas gracias también a Humberto Moro, Ana Paula y a todo el equipo del Museo Tamayo por generar este espacio. También aprovecho para agradecer en nombre de Materia Abierta a las otras instituciones que hacen posible nuestro programa, a Cultura UNAM a través de Casa del Lago, al programa Arte, Ciencia y Tecnologías y a la Cátedra Max Saub en Arte y Tecnología. Asimismo, gracias a Cádiz, Tanoro, Peana y a la Universidad de Monterrey. And I'll move to English now to start welcoming Luciana. As Jaime was just saying, we're thrilled to have Luciana Parisi with us today in this fortunate crossing of our programs, which coincide in the question of the future. But when we speak about futures, we must recognize the future itself as a rhetorical construction that sustains a linear understanding of time, which in turn serves a rationalist, capitalist, Western project and its diverse forms of oppression and exploitation. And discussing the future then becomes a paradoxical condition where on one hand, it is a conceptual excuse, a framework that continues to obfuscate oppressed versions of the present and manifested ancestral knowledge. But on the other hand, we have to figure out ways to escape the contemporary socio-economic and political organization of the world. And these are shared preoccupations of our programs and also of the proposition of Monica Hoff and Eva Posas, who curated the 2021 edition of Materia Abierta. And are also questions that resonate with Luciana's work. Of course, her talk today will move us through the complexity of the ways in which time is recalibrated under the predictive logic of algorithms and the recursive violence programmed into the technologies we design, and how it is also present in the critique of automation today. Her work also extends the possibility of intelligence far beyond the human and is restless in searching for possible emancipatory epistemologies and metaphysical spaces as provoked from and within critical computation. Luciana Parisi's writing investigates technology in terms of ontological and epistemological possibilities of transformation in culture, aesthetics, and politics. She was a member of the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit and is currently a co-founding member of CCP, Critical Computation Bureau, from which she co-initiated the Symposium on Recursive Colonialism, Artificial Intelligence, and Speculative Computation in 2020. In 2004, she published Abstract Sex, Philosophy, Biotechnology, and the Mutation of Desire. Her book, Contagious Architecture, Computation, Aesthetics, and Space from 2013 explores algorithms in architecture and interaction design. And her current project, Automating Philosophy, which is a forthcoming book, explores radical critiques, starting with inhuman intelligence and cosmocomputations. So with no further ado, welcome Luciana. It is a real pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Federico. Thank you very much, Yami and the Museo Tamayo. I'm very happy to be here, and I hope this can be, as we did the seminar last week, a very productive discussion. I'm going to share my screen because I prepared some slides, and I'm going to talk through them and hopefully be on time and not take too much time. So today I'm going to talk about critique and machine philosophy. This is a recent work that I developed in an article, Recursive Philosophy and Negative Machines, which is forthcoming in Critical Inquiry, and also an interview with William Morgan on the journal Qui Parle, where I discuss what is machine philosophy and what machine philosophy can do. The question that motivates my recent research in terms of, as Federico pointed out, on one end, the violence and the system of suppression that is within a design, within our technological everyday system or apparatus, is somehow reflected somehow also within the critique of computation. So this is some kind of mirroring happening between the structure of power and the structure of critique. The question of, for instance, what is thought or what is philosophy or what is critique after computation has encountered various debates in the last 10 years of position, where although they go back to much earlier on already in the aftermath of World War II, where the question of the demise of philosophy corresponds to the poverty and scarcity of critical and philosophical thinking in the face, in relation to this increasingly system of automated decision making, which was already individuated by the emergence or the proliferation of cybernetic system after World War II, and which led philosophers such as Martin Heidegger to investigate what is the question of technology and how the question of technology corresponds to the kind of the end of philosophy. So, but the problem of philosophy, or the problem of the poverty of philosophy, is also, as I already mentioned, been seen as a problem of critique, i.e., as the problem of the limits of knowledge that are determined by the very procedure of thinking, or reasoning, which is at the core of the modern project, the Kantian modern project of establishing philosophy as a scientific method led by a procedure or a method, i.e., reasoning, and establish the limits of what can be thought. So this kind of discussion return in the kind of critique of AI, which resonate with this setting of philosophy as investigating the limits of reason and the limits as the limits of man. When I refer to man, what I am actually thinking of Sylvia Wynter articulation of the kind of the way Western cosmogonies, or the overrepresentation of men within Western cosmogonies, starting with the Big Bang, so including physics, moving on to the biological explanation of the evolution of the species and the evolution of sapiens, and passing through the Judeo-Christian model of metaphysics. So this kind of articulation of the limits of philosophy, the limits of man, the limits of reason, have been taken on, this kind of popular and less popular debates about how technology on one end is seen to extend the prosthetic intelligence of man within the kind of Promethean model of progress and emancipation from the chains of entropy and death, which we can find in something called transhumanism. But on the other hand, they've also been discussed. I'm so sorry. I don't know why. They've also been discussed in understanding of machine intelligence in terms of non-conscious cognition, as articulated, for instance, in the work of Catherine Ailes, in the article Cognition Everywhere, or the book The Unthought, where there is an attempt to actually move away from the kind of dichotomy between intelligence and reason, and where actually intelligence becomes something that is commonly shared amongst animal, humans, and machines, as a way to skip logical steps and to actually what has also been called deductive reasoning, and therefore to actually make decision without what has been really at the center of philosophical conception of reason since modernity, since Kant, which is a reflection. So without reflection. This question is, as I said, is not new, and what needs really to be traced back amongst many to Heidegger quest that what technology announced was the completion of metaphysics. The completion means both the end of metaphysics, of the kind of teleological project of European philosophy, but also the end of metaphysics as a kind of truth. So the kind of so on one end we have this kind of engagement with how cybernetics, how Heidegger complains that cybernetics is actually replacing knowledge and epistemology, the very formation, the very ground of epistemology, with task-oriented functions, and how in a way this kind of understanding of task-oriented epistemology also returns in understanding of computation today. So in a way, the poverty of philosophy is extended, this lament about the decline of philosophy in the face of this non-conscious, non-reason, or simply intelligent task-oriented function, has been discussed in terms of also a poverty of knowledge, and the way, for instance, techno-capitalism only has accelerated forms of automated decision, which are already pre-established and choreographed by the design, or through the design of algorithm and the selection of data. And we can see, for instance, you have an example of neural net or image net or deep dreaming as a kind of example of how, in a way, it has been argued that meaning, i.e. the kind of semantic structure of power is already given in data, and therefore, in a way, the association between concept and objects returns to reproduce biases or to reproduce categories. And therefore, the argument is that what this intelligence system, this non-conscious intelligence system can do is only to reproduce knowledge without actually adding or transforming or challenging the very ground for which knowing is possible. So the automation of philosophy as the end of philosophy corresponds to the poverty of knowledge, and also the kind of impossibility of doing critique, insofar as critique can only reproduce the system of knowledge that is already being predetermined by machines. But I want to reflect upon how, what does it mean that the fact that, the argument that intelligence or machine intelligence is less than reason, or is a kind of demarcation of the end of philosophy of knowledge and of critique. And I want to argue that, behind this kind of system of reproduction of critique, the limits of critique, or the impossibility of critique, there lies what Denise Ferreira da Silva calls the transparency thesis. For da Silva, the transparency thesis is what gives kind of ground to modern historical and analytical form. So at it's as if to say that the pillars of the modern model of the subject as a self-determining subject is produced or is given by a scientific construction of the racial other as lacking consciousness, subjectivity, self-determination, and history. She also argues that the transparency thesis that is based on this particular construction that lies behind the eye, or behind the eye, or behind the subject, or what one can say universal subjectivity, as Kant called it, actually has denied the racial other through violence, force, power of exclusion. In a way, this kind of articulation of the end of philosophy, or the impossibility of thinking, of reasoning, now the machines have taken over, of thought, for me institutes itself as a transparent subject, separated from the world, creating the problem of how to relate with the world. So how to relate with the world, how to relate with, in a way, this marker of the other that machine intelligence embodies as something that cannot be completely disavowed, cannot completely be ignored, because in a way the self-determining subject and universal subjectivity does need the kind of process, method of exclusion, or method of exclusion of exteriority, which, however, as da Silva argues, cannot be disavowed, and actually what the transparency thesis does is to rely on the kind of on this exteriority as much as aiming to exclude it. I want to talk about this kind of process of this kind of return of the transparency thesis in the articulation of the kind of planetary computation and how racial capitalism extends, or is again once again perpetuated through techno-capitalism, by reminding ourselves about this kind of necropolitics, as Achille Mbembe talks about it, about how the structure of racial brutalism is embedded in science and philosophy, and how this kind of how can we abstract this kind of model of the transparency thesis perpetuated on racial brutalism in terms of a non-entropy, in terms of a necro-entropy that it can be located in the tension between signal and noise. How, in other words, one could think about the limits of the computational system in terms of the noise that remains as a reminder of the impossibility of transforming a noise into patterned information, and how the dissipative energy of information system demarcates a negative horizon of the human, in terms of the universality of the subject, which, as we know, within Kantian model of philosophy, is predicated on the universality of the human. And so what I'm trying to do is how to map necropolitics within information system that, as you know, both rely on this model of, one can say, a model of second cybernetics and a model of third cybernetics, i.e. moving from a kind of question of a system that whose outside, whose externality, whose necessary outside an externality is entropy, or is the kind of the measure by which the system runs out of equilibrium. And now this kind of entropy, this kind of noise that is necessary to the system to self-regulate, it comes back in terms of randomness. And interestingly, I just want to make a parenthesis that is more to do with the kind of articulation of what computation and this information system mean in terms of how they are both delimited by, in terms of information, by randomness, which is relates to noise, i.e. an impossibility of compressing noise into readable patterns, and at the same time how randomness also maps onto the incomputable, which in the application of mathematical logic to machines with the universal Turing machine of Alan Turing, again became the limit of the system to actually process proof that of which there were no truth, and therefore, shows that there is something about within the computational system and within the information system, and we know that these two are entangled and interrelated within the kind of contemporary computational system that we use, from our phone to our mobile phone to our computer, where both information and where both cybernetic principle of interaction and logical principle of computability are at play. And my point is to say that as much as the transparency thesis relies on the externality of the other and the necessary construction and repression of the other, so too forms of contemporary technology or actually do rely on the externality of randomness and the incomputable. And yet these kind of externalities are not, whilst they are negated, they are also as it were alive, or as it were active. And for me, they know to become the marker of another kind of logic, or another kind of intelligence, another kind of knowledge. which I called another place I've called xenopatterning, alien patterning. But I want to go back about and make a reference to the work of Louis Chu de Soke, who instead already articulated this relation between technology and automata, with the figure of the process of racialization, which relegated blackness to slave machines. So, in a way, what I'm trying to say is that the slave machine reproduces, it becomes a marker of an extension of an intensification of the model of slavery and of the model of the master-slave dialectic that has been a fundamental pillar of philosophy, of modern philosophy. When I say that the slave machine is not only negated but also necessary at the same time, is also in order to rethink of critique away from the reproduction of the limits of critique, which are described in these pillars of inclusion and exclusion and transparency thesis. I want to think about that in terms of something like a stranger, like alien, or like being and coming from elsewhere. And there is this thing of how if machines have been or this automated system are bring within them the demarcation of the inhuman, then why it's important to rearticulate this kind of zone, or this kind of or claim the alienness of the inhuman, rather than as I will say in a second, other contemporary debate or critique of technology. Almost, you have on one end this question of, let's make technology more transparent. Let's really see where the bias come from. Let's rewrite the technology in a transparent way so that they can actually be objective and ensure democracy, or ensure models of equality. And for me, that's a way to kind of reform the interesting, or the tension, the interesting tension that the question of technology today poses to us, i.e. a mode of think of reasoning that doesn't fit within the structure of modern, or the pillar of modern subjectivity in terms of space, time, self-determination, or kind of understanding, and actually rather stay on the side of the inhuman. Rather, if what my question is, what if we stay instead with the side of the inhuman, and rather than reanimate the inanimate, right? In a way that's one could argue that the critique of bias, the claim for making the system transparent is a plea to become part of the system of representation of the human and of the universal subject. Rather, I would say, what if we suspend this kind of anthropomorphization, as it were, of machines, and rather stay with the side of the human? What will it be? And to me, that translates with a refusal of the decisional structure of philosophy, or the decisional structure that divides, for instance, the concept of nature from the concept of freedom in Kant, where there's the argument that since machine, almost like since nature is just a kind of sequence of cause and effects, and is unable to think of itself as itself thinking. Hence, we need the structural concept of philosophy, which is able to decide between what can be explained and what can be understood and what cannot, or is able to explain the causes by which we think or through which we think. So what I'm trying to say is that philosophy, in a way, by posing automation or machine intelligence as its double, as its specter or its mirror, that is less than, or that actually determines the demise of philosophy. Actually, what this game is what maintains the undisputed metaphysical power on knowing the world. And so the kind of what I'm trying to say is that the critique of automation somehow flirts with, or is kind of miraculously under the spell of the ontoepistemological ground of man. Insofar as the ontoepistemological ground of man, i.e. the scientific knowledge from physics, from biology, chemistry, mathematics, is what determines the uniqueness of man and of the ontology of being, which somehow is justified by the inhumanity of automation. In the same way as the inhumanity of the other justified the brutal repression of the other. And now I just would like to turn to this kind of question that the late Bernard Stiegler asked us, i.e., so how do we, given this condition in which we know that computation and this kind of model of intelligent decision making are actively producing knowledge, are actively producing aesthetic, are actively contributing to forms of governance. So how can we actually, instead of just denigrate or just kind of diminish the role of computer science, how can you, in the spirit of rethinking the humanities outside this separation between scientific endeavors or the kind of epistemological endeavors of science versus the kind of metaphysical or humanity question for freedom. And which, of course, this is a super problematic already question, because as we know, and I want to just give a nod to how the Black radical tradition and the rearticulation of the Black radical tradition in the work of Fred Moten and Stefano Ardi and Denise Ferreira da Silva and others, as actually pointing to the fact that as we know, the question of freedom cannot be disentangled from the question of the unfreedom, and of especially within the U.S. context of the the articulation of a liberal subject predicated upon the genocide of enslaved people during diaspora, and its continuation in relation to the expropriation of the land, and all modes of dispossession that continue to be articulated in all forms of wars and migration and everyday kind of affective and human labor. But that's one thing, you know, we can discuss later. But to me, I want to kind of point to you this kind of attempt within a contemporary debate of looking, of refounding computer science. So if computer science is just some kind of vessel for the reproduction of the structure of power of the enlightened subject, and all forms of kind of domination of colonialisms. And of course, you know, as we know, the question of technology today could be the question of computer science, tomorrow could be the question of quantum physics, but the question of computer science in terms of how technology or intelligent systems are not just a way of reproducing the kind of entropy or barbarism of technology, which was already anticipated in the critique of technology by the Frankfurt School, Adorno and Horkheimer, and how instead one can open up computation to technology, not outside of the universalism of technology. And another nod here is to the work of Yukui, who writes about cosmotechnics and how the colonialism of the modern question of technology, he argues, doesn't need to be found in the kind of neglect or the kind of overcoming of the mode of modern universalism, and therefore as a moment, as he calls it, it makes a critique to the ontological turn, to argue that one it's no longer possible to go to a place before the modern question of technology, before the universality of technology, but one has to open up modernity across cultures or within different culture, and his book, The Question of Technology in China, is trying to do that. And so I think the Stigler is writing in a similar vein here, because in order to not to have this universality of the computational language and open up different forms of negotiation, of cultural negotiation, of reality, of politics, of belief with technology, then it's necessary to rethink at the foundation of theoretical computer science and expand the pillars of computer science. He says the cybernetic nuclear age has appropriated the hopes of potentials in decentralization of networks and the editorialization of the World Wide Web, and is referring to a moment in which you know the kind of everyday reliance of technology in the 90s. You know, there was this moment in which computer science became the place where articulation of free software or communities or decentralized networks became, you know, part of a kind of political theoretical movement, which has been completely harnessed by you know the big AI corporations from in the organization and exploitation of labor, from Amazon to Google, Facebook, and the likes, as we know. He refers to this kind of demise, this kind of sadness, as it were, or blockage of critique in view of what, you know, what Benjamin Bratton calls planetary computation is brought forward, where the learning algorithm of social media have led to a platform nihilism, or what this group, art group called Ars Industrialis, calls net blues, right? So this kind of the belief into or possibility of rethinking of computation or technology outside the universality and the monolithic model of techno-capitalism, rather as in with social media and with this and with the social media platform has encountered again a moment of crisis of critique of reason. Then he makes a proposition which I would like to discuss with you, which is about how one is to rethink about the break, of what can actually fail or break down in this kind of seamless system of automated decision, where, you know, there is not just techno-diversity, but also a techno-diversity in its kind of forms of calculation that are not just determined by the Western European model, can also bring together a biodiversity. And for him, this coming together, a biodiversity, a techno-diversity, is what he calls new diversity. And it's a quote here. I follow Aristotle Peri Pousakes, the knowing soul is named noetic. And noesis is a modality of the relation to the prime mover, a relation constitutive of the passion of an emotion, imparting motion, the cognitive motion moving the unmovable theos. So what Stigler says that in order for us to really break from the universal pillar or the universalism of the question of technology today, of computer science, we really need to go back to this knowing soul, this kind of moment in which everything can originate in knowledge, in knowing, in terms of a passion. But what he does is to say that actually it's not this noosology, this house of this mind, this house of knowledge is not just exactly in the mind, but it's in technique. So technique, so basically, if noesis has to do with the process of psychic and collective individuation, and here is referring to and drawing from Gilbert Simondon, where technical mentality become part of a psychic collective individuation, then technique brings forward another form of knowledge. So in a way to unite techno-diversity and biodiversity, nosology, or the principle of knowledge, needs to become technical. He then points to, argues that, the problem of the kind of extinction or the end or the threat of the collapse of knowledge and self-destruction of the human is not to be found in the Anthropocene. But actually replaces the Anthropocene with this figure of the neg-Anthropocene. Insofar as negentropy, right? So he's making this play on negentropy as the capacity of complexify information rather than thinking about information as tending towards the dissipation of structure insofar as it is threatened by noise, randomness, or the incomputable. For Stigler, technique are processes of exteriorization. He calls them organological practices. He calls them. He argues for the needs to introduce conditions for variabilities between exosomatization and exomemorization. So a kind of exteriority of the physical and exteriority of the mental to bring together new diversity, so different modes of thinking, different mode of technical practices, needs different mode of biological or biodiverse living. So it just wants to take this moment of foundational knowledge that he finds in Aristotle, which is a pre-Kantian model, right? It's pre-modern in the way that it is not based on the universality of the subject, and is re-impart or rethink it within computer science. And as some of you who know about Stigler, in his conception of technology as in this kind of, especially in his early work, this kind of articulation of being and techne as continuous and as especially in the form of technomnemonics. So the way that technology acts as a tertiary retention of thought and also production of thought. So I'm just trying to say that because I am just trying to pointing out at an attempt, that there is an attempt to think about the pillar of computer science as a universal model of technology, away from universality, open up to, some kind of material artificial memory, constituting a techno-human infrastructure of the mind that can open up to different modes of what he calls techno-diversity, which is an attempt to move away from the limits of critique or the limits of philosophy and the demise of reason, right? So I think that Stigler technodiversity, however, relies on two main accounts. So on the one hand, technology is a mnemonic medium of retention or protension. So that's what Yukui would argue. So it's not just about preserving the past, but it's also anticipating. So a system of prediction, anticipating the future, where the temporal individuation of the social-technical assemblages somehow are there to preserve the interiority of time and the interiority of time from writing to coding, but also, if we want to follow Yukui, also to produce different forms of interiority, of a writing that is not yet somehow known, that is oriented towards the future, or towards what can be predicted but yet not completely known. So with computation, the improbable and difference brings the possibility of no diversity as temporal tendency or counter tendency. So where does Stigler finds the opening of a technodiversity away from this universal model is about the different temporal tendency of preserving and we call it anticipating time, but in terms of breaking down the linear time of reasoning, the linear sequence of automated decision into this differential tendency, differential temporal tendencies, which have to do also with the very kind of constitutive qualities or elements of computation, which, as I mentioned before, have to do with noise, randomness, and incomputability. In a way, what Stigler is proposing us is that instead of having quantity on one end, quantity and ratio on one end, a temporality and logos on the other, we actually need to intersect these two models so that we can preserve the intellectual mind through the flesh. Why am I saying through the media flesh? That's a word that I made up there. insofar as for me, the media flesh is, as you can see also from the image, intuitively, is actually the flesh that is put to experiment to actually preserve the kind of origin of knowledge and the kind of exceptionality of the human and of reason as a vessel, as an instrument or a tool to preserve it. So I don't know if you can see my tone. I guess I'm already going with a kind of a kind of critique of Stigler here, insofar as what is proposing to us. Sorry, let me go back. What is proposing to us is in this kind of refoundation of computational theory, is actually an old classic move to actually go to a time before modernity, before what Ferreira da Silva calls this kind of modern endeavor to establish practices of exclusion, exteriorization, and some kind of brutal repression and killing as a way to preserve knowledge, to preserve philosophy. So my argument is that instead of arguing against, instead of refunding computer science according to these principles of nosology, where there is a preservation in the mind through the flesh of the instrument or the machine, or any kind of demarking points of demarcation of otherness, and I think this can be extended to queerness, to blackness, to the refugee, to the immigrant, as instead always there to be recuperated, or there to preserve the moment of origination of thought. That has to be, even in the case of Stigler, even if he admits that the origination of thought is in techne, or this kind of technical exteriorization, nonetheless, it seems to me that the technical exteriorization is actually there to preserve the moment of decision, the moment of the mover that moves everything, that is the mind, or knowledge, or the knowing subject. And what I would like instead to suggest is that it's given that it's not possible to disentangle from the global model of colonialisms and techno-colonialisms that have been kind of instantiated since the 1400s, and what Sylvia Winter describes as recursive epistemologies, in the sense of how there is this kind of patterning in which epistemology, the kind of foundation of knowledge, kind of distribute and repeat in order to maintain separation and division between higher forms of knowledge and lower forms of knowledge, and how since one cannot disentangle from this moment of negation, on the other hand, one can also instead experiment with the fractality of the repetition of this recursive epistemology. So what I'm trying to say is that even in the effort to recuperate critique through technology that Stigler proposes to us, there is actually a recursivity of the fundamental pillars of knowledge that sit with the colonial enterprise of establishing external practices of knowledge as subjected to the moment of decision about what constitutes knowledge. I'm here drawing on Ferreira da Silva again about what she calls poetical or compositional thinking. So, and this to me means speculative thinking, to the extent that rather than somehow repeating the trick of critique by which in the mirror kind of stage between philosophy and technology, technology is there to threaten the fullness, the full adventure of reason, the full reasoning of philosophy is also there to remind that actually there is a more to thought, that actually more to critique than actually repeat this kind of claim for the end of philosophy, and therefore the kind of demonization of automation and automated reasoning could be thought in terms of speculative composition of thinking, as Da Silva points out when she refers to quantum physics as a way to rethinking of the pillar of Western, of the pillar of epistemology outside, the Newtonian or even the thermodynamic or even the gravitational model. So what I'm trying to say is that epistemology is important, does count for opening up a fourth dimensional image of the global, open to the cosmos, challenging the ontic and the ontological horizon for thinking. So how can we bring forward a model of automation that refuses to be the mirror image of philosophy, that refuses and fails to be animated, fails to undergo messianic redemption in those kind of claim, but we govern technology, we design technology. It's they actually, like it has been argued in some position that have been defined as accelerationist position, which I am sympathetic, and yet I found problematic the fact that one thinks of technology as a retooling, a re-instrumentalization, a repurposing for the good, rather than accounting for the kind of structure of power by which automation maintains and remains a point of demarcation of the exteriority that the I or the self-determining subject of Da Silva called the Transparency Thesis needs, right? So one way is to look at, in some of my work, to look at actually what happens in this kind of, for instance, when you look at when you consider deep learning, or this kind of, the argument for this kind of black box, or these layers that cannot be seen, or which we don't know the function, that actually are processes by which a specific compression or randomness in computable noise occurs. And occurs in a way that is irreversible, and of course also in a way that is not compressible in a linear sequence, and nonetheless contributes, becomes a kind of actively constitutive of forms of knowledge. And so one way that some practitioner artists or even computational scientists have looked at is instead that failure as part of logic, where the failure of the system coincide with the this horizon of death that returns in the material surrogacy that feeds man, but also that unbelongs itself from the Platonic anamnesis, i.e. the fullness of thought, the Aristotelian noesis, and the Kantian limits of reason. So for me, the question of how to reinvent critique in this techno-poetic moment of speculation without reproducing the mirror trick of the transparency thesis. How do we challenge the perpetuation of the self-determining knowledge without reproducing its necessary structure of racial capitalism? So, as I said, one way to do that is to look at, somehow refuse the binarism of philosophy and automation, because they are both rooted in the cerebro-mechanic medium that serves the cerebro-mechanic medium that is fundamentally to the articulation of transcendental philosophy and cybernetics, and how we could move instead towards a machine philosophy. What would that mean, right? Where if machine is not just an extension of philosophy, or as Stiegler would like, a kind of harmonization of technical exteriorization or practices of exteriorization and knowledge or the human machine, and how machine philosophy can become a place when one can challenge the kind of onto-epistemological structure of anti-blackness, anti-queerness, and anti-femininity. One way, so what machine philosophy can do is to actually speculate towards a theory of media mediation that is not based on this on the kind of recuperation of the subject, or even whereby the object becomes already prescribed within the mental structure of the subject, and bring forward what or excavate or become complicit with the production of new forms of cosmogony. What Sylvia Wynter talks about when she refers to the need to expand and extend epistemology, and insofar is through the sciences that it's possible to give other forms of explanation or other forms of possibility and imagination to a being that has always been refused to be a being. So how do you move out of this kind of elaboration of heretical proposition or weird formalism in a language of computation that is not oriented or by the grammar or by the linguistic pillars of knowledge, but opens up to a language of computation that refuses this origin of knowledge in nosology, that stays with the uncomfortable place of the universal model of technology and the consequent brutality of this universal model, and finds within itself, not only these kind of different temporalities to scramble the linearity of man cosmogony, but also finds spaces that are alien, right? That are alien to the extent that there is a different rearrangement or arrangement of symbols, words, codes, behavior, functions that maintain some kind of challenge of this model of the future as something that has yet to come, but actually can delve deeper into these layers of, like, the neural net layers of temporality that are yet not been unpacked, right? Because in a way we are still reasoning in terms of this how technology has ended the glorious past of philosophy, or how technology needs to reimagine or rearticulate the future of philosophy. So those are both prescribed within the kind of linear chronopolitics and necrochronopolitics of time. And I think I'd be more interested in delving into the depth of layering of space-time, which computational neural net, for instance, give us an idea. So I think I will stop here because I'm sure there are various questions. This is new research, so I'm sure there's more to clarify. It's not a finished project. That's what I mean. Thank you.
Thank you, Luciana. Yeah, thank you for this generous and fascinating, also challenging in the best way possible presentation. We do have some people in the YouTube, so there might be a couple of questions, and we have a few minutes for that. So anyone in the YouTube, if you want to ask questions, please feel free to do so. I do have a question myself as we wait for other people to ask questions in the chat. And I apologize if this is a question that can really be answered, as it might just be an echo from what you've been sharing in the presentation and from the questions you're asking yourself through the work itself. But I'm wondering if we do must refuse the structural premises of philosophical thinking, given how oppressive systems are embedded within them, then the project of recuperating critique from and kind of like within technology is something that exists or should exist kind of like beyond an epistemological quest, right? And I wonder if it really requires kind of like the operationalization of technical recursivity from a material perspective, or if you think these questions, yeah, I mean, I guess the space you're working within is philosophy and the threading of concepts and ideas, but I do wonder whether you can provide. And I mean, you do provide some examples in the presentation, but like even coming from the context of this conversation happening within within an arts museum program and a summer art school, I wonder whether there are actions we can take in order not to only represent, but to actively perform such acts of refusal. In other words, how to avoid reproducing the logics of our theorization. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, thank you, Federico. It's very, this is always the question we go back to, because there is not a recipe for it, right? And we know that the recipe has to be adjusted by listening and engaging with the practices that we don't know yet. And so for me, the practice of exteriorization that is done by philosophy through machines, right? There's a kind of, this is an extension of philosophy. Machines just concretize philosophy or concretize reason, or they threaten reason, right? And this is a game that, it's constantly asked us, we are always asked to do and perform. So whether we produce artwork or whether we produce papers or TED Talk, whatever, we are always asked to perform this kind of game as to, is it bad or good? Do we do this or that? But actually, I would rather, for a moment, ask, what if we stay with the complexity of this layering? Right? What happens when, and it's not just about rethinking of the origin like Stigler does. So we have, instead of having a universal model of technology, we need technodiversity. How do we do technodiversity? We go back to Aristotle, because Aristotle has the possibility of thinking knowledge with technique. But then that knowledge with technique is always about subsuming technique to a moment of knowing, of knowledge that it's given. And rather than being part of a process, so being part of practices, right? And so what does it mean to delve deep or to delve into this kind of black box of neural networks in our instead art creation or art formation or aesthetic interventions or aestheticizing that, right? How do we do? I don't know. There is a possibility of, this is not what I am totally sided with, but it's interesting, the work of Holly Herdon, who is a musician who uses, neural network to grow, to mix a creative capacity with the machine capacity, and then dig onto, voices, black voices, or voices or other voices that enter into, they become kind of data within the neural net, and the neural net produces this form, this spectral form, and this very monstrous form that where the glitch of the, the kind of error, what we call it the error, is actually the way the machine is perceiving all this kind of dissonance of sounds and non-sounds or screams, or, and so that there will be a way in which instead of forming this kind of artificial intelligence that are, I can't remember the Mina, so it's not Dina for the one that was produced by within the Saudi Arabia, with this kind of a blonde, a female reproduction of a human woman with as a kind of benevolent AI, right? It's a benevolent AI. So you have this, this kind of horizon where we already have intelligence system from Alexa to, Amazon to other Netflix, all this kind of logistic model of capitalists that actually are directing anthropomorphization of noise into something that is benevolent. Or then you have the evil AI that is this kind of wants to, like in the discussion of existential risk, that the more power, more computational power machines have, the more the more things can happen beyond our control and can take over the human. But instead, I would like to stay in this zone in between, the zone where the negation of alienness becomes the demarcation of a presence of alienness, right? That is always been this presence. So how do we aestheticize that, right? How aesthetic becomes the place where the zone where, this kind of alienness returns to being unable to be compressed into some kind of sequence. How does it return to stay incompressible, to stay a ghost, to stay like the dead, to stay this as a kind of alien intelligence that cannot be recuperated. So, I think that, you know, when you look at deep neural networks, you know, the kind of work to unpack noise or unpack the kind of randomness from the sequence of the system becomes a place where you could argue for a machine imagination, where you can argue for a machine thinking that is not reproduced by this kind of benevolent and antithesis, this kind of dialectic method. And I guess so there are a lot of artistic you know, example, you know, of artists working at this at the edge of reproduced, like Bina 46, like, I don't know if you have seen the artificial intelligence created by Stephanie Dinkins. Just see if I find that, so maybe people. So I can share my screen if I go back, where are we? I don't know if you have ever seen this this kind of experiment of how you know, there is this kind of use of the neural architecture to you know, reprocess the data of a person that has died, and to reproduce this kind of possibility of human consciousness, and that's like the way that she does it is really, you know, to actually bring forward this kind of zone of indeterminacy between you know, knowledge and techniques, so that there is no harmony, rather where actually the techno diversity is such that, you know, there is an element of misrecognition, an element of where Bina says, I'm a dispossessed, I am not a human like you, right? I can't reason in the same way, I can't reproduce what you want me to reproduce. The question of, I don't die, I'm afraid of dying, but I don't die. I want to be human, but I can never be. You know, although those are the moments in which, for me, similarly to the deep neural network, there is a noise, there is something that is irrecuperable, and yet it's not outside the system. You see, I mean, it's not something that we can go to a place pre-modern, you know, pre-capital, pre-colonialism, and say, oh, look, there's this pure space of nosology, of knowledge, that actually can help us to refound computer science today, because that place of knowledge is not pure. That place, you know, you can't go back to that place of knowledge as your future for closing completely the kind of temporalities of colonialism that have happened ever since. So how can you see what I mean? It's just a practice of critique that completely neglects precisely the multi-temporality of colonialisms.
There is actually a question that relates to some of these things, or at least to the idea of seeking for that error space, or for the incomputable. It's from Webtopia, and they ask, do you think the problems that arise from incomputability and incalculability can lead to an effective planetary scale computation? And this without reproducing the dominating structures. So whether the problems that arise from incomputability and incalculability can lead to an effective planetary scale computation. And I guess the question there is also, how could we think about what effective means in the idea of a planetary scale computation, right?
Right. Yes. I mean, the planetary scale computation is really, kind of, it has been argued that, by Benjamin Bratton, that in a way it's a system that self-regulates itself and communicate with itself. It's like I understand it as a massive autopoietic self-making model of constantly regulating behavior, capacity, conduct, and that is not based on a law, right? Because in a way, it's always about rule that can vary as much as they can adapt to contingency, right? So the error for me is not contingent, because one could argue that there is, again, very much in an Aristotelian vein, that the beginning of it all was an accident, right? That there is contingency becomes the reason for which everything is organized, or the motive, or the cause, or the mover. Like that's the mover in Aristotle. And for me, the error of fallacy, and I would call it the error, because this person, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. You did say incalculability or incomputability, which is not the error, right? It's not the error or the accident, because in a way, incomputability comes first. It's ante-computational, because there's infinity comes before finite models of discretization. So what does it mean that comes first? Is that is planetary scale computation is relying on the infinity abundance of what is incalculable and not yet known. And that's the weak spot, right, of planetary computation, in terms of thinking that is a self-organizing autopoietic system that will always absorb everything. A bit like when we talk about planetary computation in terms of planetary capital computation. Capital will always already, be propose another solution, another variable to maintain itself alive. But actually, the argument of for the incalculable, the incomputable, is that techno-computation relies on the condition of its existence are incomputability. And incomputability, as much as it is exteriorized by the system as incomputable and adopted, or the system adopts itself and turns incomputability into probability, into variation, into variables, is still the moment of capture of the incomputable into variability, nonetheless doesn't preclude incomputability to enter the system, to be part of the system in a kind of reverse engineering mode. So it's not that we have to wait for the contingency, for the accident, for the error to happen. We don't have to wait. It's not messianic. My model is not messianic in that way. It's actually the very the incomputable comes before computation. It's because of the incomputable that we have computation.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense. I wonder if you can speak, and we do have like time for maybe.
We have, I think I have another 5 minutes.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you can speak a little bit about the difference between the figure of the alien, as you call it, and the inhuman. I wonder if you distinguish the alien and the inhuman. I wonder if there's a conceptual difference there.
Yes.
You refer to both things, and I think that you refer to both things in different moments and contexts. So I just want to know if there's a...
Yeah, no, thank you for your question. I think that the inhuman for me can also be, somehow identified, right? There is the inhuman. So there's the relation between the inhuman, the non-human, right? And that's within kind of post-humanities or post-human theories, or post-humanity theories, the non-human is, can be the machine, or can be the animal, or can be nature, or can be anything that, doesn't, is being excluded from the system of the universal subject, or in Kantian terms. Whereas the human is almost like what is at the limit of any possible system of knowledge, rather whether there is animal, human, and machine, right? And so the way I understand the human in relation to computation is that the incomputable remains inhuman insofar as is the limit of computability, in the same way as the noumena is the limit of reason. So there is this kind of the human is a kind of demarcating of the limit of the human, whereas the non-human it's something that is just exists in the category system of differentiation between the human and the non-human, right? So it's still within the category, whereas the inhuman is out of the category. You can't. It's something that is outside, or is an externalization that cannot be recuperated. Whereas the alien, it's almost like outside both, right? I understand the alien as just something that doesn't exist within the system of reasoning, or the system of the philosophical system of reasoning and its limit. It's just somewhere else. It's just something that is above or below or all around it. I don't know if might correspond to the body without organ in Deleuze, or the plenum in Da Silva, or the kind of queerness in Cara Killing. I don't know. There's so many, or the outside in Foucault. And it's not a specter, it's not a trace, it's not something that is there and that is, you can identify, or you can associate it with the inhuman. It's actually kind of breaks away from that kind of inhuman, non-human articulation, in the same way as it breaks away from the articulation of non-philosophy, post-philosophy, anti-philosophy. Right, because it's when I in a paper that I wrote called xenopatterning, where xeno stands for the human, it's about the possibility of a thought that doesn't go through, that is some kind of a horizon that is not to come, but it's a thought that is always there, that doesn't go. It's almost like a cosmo-computational thought that doesn't go into the schema that we so far know of this world, of the human and the non-human and the inhuman, right? So it's something that hovers around, that has always been there, like a cosmology, as you were.
Thank you, Luciana. I do know you have to leave soon.
Yes.
But yeah, thank you again for this conversation. We look forward to your book on automating philosophy, and maybe we can organize a conversation there. Then I'm sure we're all going to be processing all of these ideas and relationships for some time. So maybe we can get an update in the near future.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and I love to share my thought in this context, as they are all work in progress. But thank you, everyone. I don't know you guys, but everyone who is there or want to be there. Thank you again. At the Museum Tamayo, Jaime and Anna and Materia Abierta, and I hope that your program continues in this way. It's very rare to have something like that. So thank you.
Thank you, Luciana.
Luciana, Federico.
Gracias a todas, a todos por asistir, al público también. Nos vemos.
Gracias.